By relying on a semiconductor miniaturization technology and using electron beams to write data on the chip substrates, Hitachi was able to create RFID chips 64 times smaller than their current available 0.4 by 0.4 millimeter microchips that we just talked about. They're being used in an anti-counterfeit measure, in admission tickets. The new chips have a 128-bit ROM for storing a unique 38-digit ID number. At 5 microns thick, the RFID chips can be more easily embedded in sheets of paper, meaning they can be used in paper currency, gift certificates, and identification. But since existing tags are already small enough to embed in paper, it leads one to wonder what new applications the developers have in mind. Okay, and then this is the last article where we talk about this, and it's entitled "The Chip is at the Tip of the Needle." Now, this was just put out August 27th, 2009. This is from a guy named Dr. Reich Gerd Hammer, and he's the inventor of what they call the New German Medicine, which I'll just read what that is, so you have a little background. I went. This is right off his blog. Now, if you go to his blog, it's in German. Somebody translated it, and you can go up there and do that yourself. You can actually copy and paste stuff, and there's a way in Internet Explorer that you can actually translate big blocks of text. And so it's a little bit. I tried to clean it up a little bit because in the translation you obviously get a little bit of, you lose a little bit in the translation. But the New German Medicine, which is what he developed, was developed by Dr. Reich Gerd Hammer, MD. He operates under the premise that every disease, including cancer, originates from an unexpected shock experience. The discovery came after Dr. Hammer, the former head internist in the oncology clinic at the University of Munich, Germany, lost his son in an unexpected tragedy, then developed testicular cancer. The diagnosis led him to study the connection between stressful events and disease by investigating the history of his cancer patients. I don't agree with this. I'll just tell you right off, I don't agree with it. I think it's a component of cancer, but for somebody, there's so many people that come out and make these blanket statements, like Hilda Clark, all cancer is caused by parasites. Or this guy, all cancer is caused by some previous traumatic event. These things are things that can contribute to cancer, but there is a ton of things that can cause cancer. Environmental Protection Agency alone said quite a way years back, said that there's 75,000 chemicals that we're exposed to, potentially exposed to on a daily basis, and of those, the vast majority of them are carcinogenic or cancer-causing. Now, you could take something that's carcinogenic into your system year after year and have no trauma in your life and still get cancer. So I don't like it when these guys, but the problem is they get locked into their pet idea, and it's just got to be their way. And there's a lot of people like that, and it's just not the case. There's multiple causes for cancer. I could do probably a 20-part study on all the potential causes of cancer. They all contribute. Okay, some are more malevolent or aggressive than others, the causes. And I'm not saying he doesn't have a great point here, but the blanket statement's what I have the problem with. Anyway, so this doctor, this is an interview from his blog, okay? And he said yesterday, August 27th, actually this is when it was the date of the lecture he was at. Yesterday, August 27, 2009, I was giving an introductory talk about the German New Medicine, which is what he developed, near Vienna, Austria. My wife was with me and about 40 listeners. At the end of the discussion, the swine flu was mentioned, and a lady got up and declared the following. This is what this lady said. A friend of hers works for a pharmaceutical company in Vienna and told her that the swine flu injection needles indeed contain nanoparticles in the very tip of the needle, which cannot be detected with the naked eye, but are clearly visible with as little as a 12 times magnifying microscope, like a children's toy microscope. The staff of the pharmaceutical company was advised that these nanoparticles work in the human body like a motherboard in the computer, and lots of data can be stored on it. The lady further disclosed that she was working in the medical field. She had asked the lawyers who came to her as a patient how it was possible to avoid being chipped. He told her that he was aware of the planned chipping of the population, and in fact most upper-class members of society were aware of this plan. For this year, no forced vaccinations were planned, but to rather encourage people through the media to volunteer for the job. In case too few would come forward, forced vaccination was planned for next year, except from those professional groups like the elite, the politicians, etc. Being a lawyer, he knew ways for himself to avoid the jab, or the taking the vaccination. But for the majority of the population, there was no escape. Well, that's from an unsaved perspective. The Lord Jesus Christ can protect you in any situation that you get in. Okay, but let's just review this. Now, granted, this is secondhand information. Okay, but looking at all of the previous studies we've done on this, looking at the fact that we know they have the technology to implement this, this is what I would expect they would try to pull. Not something that, I mean, you know, obviously we can have extremely grave concerns regarding this issue. This is what I've been expecting all along, that they would try to implement this. And these nanoparticles would actually be at the tip of the needle of the swine flu vaccinations. They inject them into you. Now, granted, it's not the mark of the beast, okay? But we're going to look at what they believe these actual particles can do. Now, I talked about in my previous PowerPoint on this, the concept of what they call injectable nanorobots, okay? Meaning they're like nano-sized robots that they actually inject into you. Now, the premise that they say that they would do this is because these robots can go in and actually repair things in the body. But obviously they could do the exact opposite as well. Okay? And obviously they could be used as a means to track you. And this is what they're saying. This is what she's saying. So if you had a magnifying microscope as little as 12 times magnifying, you can actually see these. And they work like a motherboard in the computer. Lots of data can be stored on it. So now, this is an interview with this particular doctor, Dr. Gert Hammer, and actually, he's not a doctor, he's an engineer, Helmut Filar. This interview was on Wednesday, the 26th, August 2009. And this is Dr. Hammer, and he says, you can best understand what the intent is by what is not being talked about. In other words, when we talk about the vaccinations, he's saying we can best understand their intent by what they're not saying. He goes on to say, one may talk about vaccination, but nobody mentions the chip implanting by name. That is really strange because the chipping is the obvious issue in the face of these massive governmental measures. And that the Hitachi chips works and can be combined with the death chip we already talked about during the last interview. Now, he mentions Hitachi by name. I didn't know he was even going to talk about Hitachi. But he mentions that, so we're going beyond. I know we started out with the VeriChip and Applied Digital Solutions, but those things are like monstrosities compared to what we're talking about here as far as the size of them. Okay? I mean, if you were the devil, think about it this way. Wouldn't you want to try to sneak these things into the bodies of human beings any possible way you could, and then worry about chipping with the big chips later? Or who knows how far down the VeriChips will be reduced, you know, by the time the mark of the beast comes about. They may be, you know, 100 times smaller. Who knows? He mentions the Hitachi chips by name here, okay, in his blog. And then he's saying these Hitachi chips can be combined with what they call a death chip. Now, I wasn't able to find out anything more about this death chip. I did a little bit of research, but he's evidently talked about these in previous interviews. For 28 years, this goes on to say, for 28 years, one was only allowed to discuss, he's talking about himself, for 28 years, one was only allowed